Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for being here tonight. I was just reading the Jefferson Educational Society motto or statement on your Facebook page, and I thought this is a really timely message for right now. Educate and inform the whole mass of people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. From Thomas Jefferson. And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight as we go along. The title for this was publicized as Redistricting Reform, Why It Still Matters. And I think if you've been watching the news recently, you probably know why it still matters. The Redistricting War is Here was a headline a couple weeks ago, and I thought, yeah, that's it. The Redistricting War is here, and Pennsylvania, in some ways, is not in it, and in some ways, we will be in it. And it's important to be aware of that and to be informed and to be prepared. So what are we going to do tonight? What are we talking about tonight? First, we're going to start with a three-word vocabulary. Probably most of you know some of those words. Some of you may know all of the words. I'll confess the three words I'm going to share tonight I had never heard until 2015, and there are many, many people I talk to who still have not heard those words. So we're going to start with some vocabulary just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then we're going to do a very, very brief 2-century history. It'll be brief, I promise. And then a one-state PA story about how this plays out. We're going to talk about connecting the dots, and we're going to talk about where we are in a variety of ways here in Pennsylvania and what we need to do next. So, vocabulary word 1, reapportionment. That is the redistribution of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives, normally done every 10 years after the national census, and the census is always the year ending in 0. The last one was 2020. The next one will be 2030. Those 435 seats stay the same, but how many seats a state has changes based on population relative to the other states. And Pennsylvania has been losing a seat or two every decade for decades now. And we lost one this most recent reapportionment. We went from 18 to 17. But you might notice that Pennsylvania is the most populous swing state. So there are 4 states that have more seats than us, and they have been in the news lately, but we are the most populous of the swing states, which is important as we talk about this story. Redistricting is the second word, and that is the redrawing of voting district lines. So for a long time, some states just population shifted around, but as long as they didn't lose a seat, they wouldn't, or gain a seat, they would not change the district lines, which could mean a real disparity of representation depending on where the lines were. In 1964, in Reynolds versus Sims, the Supreme Court said the Constitution promises us one person, one vote, and that means regularly redrawing or redistricting congressional lines, but also state and House lines based on the population shifts reflected in the census. So that happens now by law every year following the census. So the last one was 2021. Next one will be 2031. States decide how this is done. So states decide how congressional and state House and Senate district boundaries are drawn. In Pennsylvania, the congressional map is enacted as a bill. That means it passes through both chambers, and then it's signed by the governor. The Senate map are drawn by the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, and that commission is 5 people. It's the majority and minority leaders from the House and the Senate. So that's 4, and those are our most powerful legislators in the state. And then they are supposed to agree on a 5th person, and they have never agreed on a 5th person yet. So if they don't agree on the 5th person, then what happens is the PA Supreme Court appoints somebody who then is confirmed by a majority vote of the 4 initial commissioners. So that gives you 5. And the most recent commission was Kim Ward, who was at the time the majority leader of the Senate, Jay Costa, the minority leader of the Senate, Carrie Benninghoff was the majority leader in the House, Joanna McClinton was the minority leader in the House. First time there were ever women on this commission, so that was great. And the 5th person, they did not agree on a 5th person. The state Supreme Court chose Mark Nordenberg, who in the past had been nominated nominated by the court when the court had a Republican majority, and he had been approved by the two Republican commissioners in the past. One of the Democratic commissioners had voted no because Mark Nordenberg was a Republican at the time, and then the other Democrat abstained, so there was no majority, so he was not appointed, but he had been nominated twice in the past by a Republican court, and this time the entire court said he's the perfect person to do it. We had appealed to the court to choose somebody totally impartial instead of just somebody who would rubber stamp on one side, and they did. They chose a very fair, very smart commissioner who I would argue did a really good job. Which brings us to our next word, which is gerrymandering, manipulation of electoral maps for political advantage. If you have a commission with 3 of one party and 2 of the other, what do you think happens? The party that has the 3 is able to manipulate the maps for their own advantage. And this word goes back a long way. This is our 200-year history, one page of 200-year history. That word comes from Elbridge Gerry, who was the governor of Massachusetts back in 1812. He was one of the initial signers of the Declaration of Independence. He went on to become vice president of the U.S. briefly. But in 1812, as governor of Massachusetts, he signed off on a district that looked like a salamander. That graphic is what the district looked like. It looked like a salamander. And the press of the day coined the word gerrymander after Elbridge Gerry and his salamander. That's where the word comes from, back in 1812. The same people who draw maps have a vested interest in creating districts that will help them stay in office. So whenever you have people drawing maps for themselves and their colleagues, they're going to think about how they can do that in a way that benefits themselves and harms the people that they most dislike or want to get rid of. New technologies have made this much more precise, and when you think about what you can do with maps now that you couldn't do 20 or 30 years ago, when you think about the kind of data that you can collect and harvest and use, it's become extremely precise, a very weaponized activity that can be done with great precision. And people say, well, the Democrats did it first or the Republicans did it first. Elbridge Gerry himself was a member of the Democratic Republican Party, so when people try to tell you who started it, you can say, actually, both were involved. The Democratic Republican Party was the beginning of this. So there's a number of ways that this plays out. One is called cracking, and that's splitting a population and spreading its members where they become an irrelevant minority. So you could take a population and find ways to put a group that might have 2 or 3 districts. You can kind of spread them out so they end up with none. And one example, we could find many examples in Pennsylvania's past maps. This one is kind of, you can see it pretty well because this is the area, the industrial area along the Beaver River in the Beaver Falls area, was split in the 2011-2012 redistricting. It was split into 4 House maps, 4 House districts, all of them Republican, so a deeply Democratic strip along the river was splintered out into those 4 districts, and if you look at that, you think, that doesn't make any sense to draw that unless you're thinking, well, it does make sense if you're trying to control the outcome of that election, and that's what gerrymandering is. It's controlling the outcome of elections. Another one is packing, and that's kind of concentrating voters of one party or group in as few districts as possible so that you have the other districts go the other direction. And we could find lots of packing also across Pennsylvania in previous decades. And this was a district in Philadelphia that went through some very blue parts of Philadelphia, but then reached into the neighboring counties to kind of grab some blue areas in those counties so those counties would go completely Republican. That was the goal there. There's some new words I've learned more recently. One is buddymander, and that's when leaders say, well, we want to keep these incumbents, you want to keep those incumbents, so we'll just kind of agree on some districts that keep those folks there. And often there is some buddymandering going on. We'll agree on these ones, and we'll keep those people there. You could also call it a sweetheart deal. And another one that I just heard this summer is dummymander. And that is, if you think about it, you have a certain population population and you're dividing them across districts so you win more districts. But those people can only be divided so far before they start to lose, or before you've kind of spread them across thinking, okay, well, we want to find 5 more Republican districts in this particular state, which is what's been happening this summer. And then you've spread them so thin that if there's a slight blue wave, that whole ship sinks. In other words, some of those districts will flip and go the other direction. It can go either way, but Bernie Grofman, who's an expert in redistricting, professor at UCLA, said the carrying capacity of any lifeboat is limited. So is the carrying capacity of a party's electoral strength. Stretch it too thin, and you'll start losing districts. So with what's going on in California, in Texas, and we'll talk a bit more about Texas and California as we go, will a Texas redistricting create a dummy mander? In other words, Texas already had one of the most gerrymandered congressional maps in the country, and if you want to get 5 more Republican districts out of an already badly gerrymandered map, you might be creating a dummy mander. There's been some discussion about that in the press. What's really the case, we won't know until the next election. And there's some risk being taken, and some Republican legislators in Texas are looking at the new map and saying, this puts me at risk, and they're not happy. We'll see how that plays out. So Pennsylvania, I want to go back to Pennsylvania, kind of talk a little bit about Pennsylvania's story in this, because last decade, we had some of the worst maps in the country. And this was our congressional map drawn in 2011. And if you look at that, there's some strange stuff going on there. If you look at down in the southeast, there's there was a district called Goofy Kicking Donald, that kind of reddish-pink district. I lived right in the middle of that, in that yellow mass right in the middle of it, but I couldn't go anywhere without going through Congressional District 7. Mine was Congressional District 6. And I couldn't get from my part of that yellow district, Congressional District 6, to the other end of the district without going through 2 different districts. Montgomery County, the county next to mine, was divided into 5 congressional districts, even though it fits very nicely in one. And my county, Chester County, was divided into 3 congressional districts, even though it would fit very nicely into one. And if you looked at the electoral outcomes of that map, 2012, the vote cast was almost even, slight Democratic advantage in terms of votes cast. Republicans got 13 seats, Democrats got 5. It's a pretty good gerrymander. 2014, Republicans got a slight advantage. They still got 13-5. 2016, slight advantage to Republicans, 13-5. So there was a locked-in 13-5 with that map, no matter what voters did. And what happened, as someone who lived in a very gerrymandered district, voters across the state started noticing, our legislators don't listen to us at all. They don't have to. They don't care. My legislator had no town halls, and when people complained, he had a town hall that was invitation only. And in that Congressional District 7, there were no town halls at all. If you have a district that's drawn for you, that voters have no say, nothing's going to happen. So in 2017, the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania filed a lawsuit against the Pennsylvania General Assembly, led by the Public Interest Law Center. You probably have all heard of this lawsuit. It was filed in 2017 in Commonwealth Court, got moved to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found that map that we're looking at contrary to the Pennsylvania Constitution right to free and equal elections. And what was really interesting in that lawsuit is there had been previous partisan gerrymandering lawsuits, but they had all been brought in federal court. And the U.S. Supreme Court had said, partisan gerrymandering is not justiciable in federal court. In other words, the federal court has nothing to say about this, and the U.S. Constitution has nothing to say about this. Whereas the Pennsylvania Constitution promises us free and equal elections. It's in the language of our Constitution. Our Constitution here in Pennsylvania was one of the first 2 constitutions, state constitutions, drafted and passed. And many, many other states have that same language borrowed from our Constitution. So this was a really important case and a really big one. In 2018, February 2018, the court provided a new plan. And this was a big historic win. I don't know if you realize how important this win was for democracy and for the story of redistricting, but it was the first successful partisan gerrymandering case based on the state constitution, resulting in a new congressional map. Now, you might have already begun to see there's a retention vote. There's a retention vote for 3 of our state Supreme Court members coming up in November. And there are already advertisements out there saying they gerrymandered Pennsylvania's map, vote no. I just want to say the PA Supreme Court did not gerrymander anything. They corrected a badly gerrymandered map and delivered a map that serves the people better. And so there's the map that was bad, and here's the new court-ordered map. You see any difference there? I mean, you can just look at those, and you can say, which of those is gerrymandered? The top one. You can just look at it and see the difference. So, and the outcome was clear. In 2018, with the new map, the votes cast and the seats won were almost, 50-50, 9-9. And the next one, it was almost exactly 50-50, and again, it was 9-9. So much more reflective of votes cast and seats won, much closer. Before 2018, PA ranked 49th of 50 states for women in elected office. Only Mississippi was worse. In the 2019 election, we had 4 women elected to Congress. It was the first time Pennsylvania had 4 women elected to Congress. It was the first time since 2014 Pennsylvania had even 1 woman in Congress. It was the first time ever for more than 2 in Congress at one time. And the next year, we actually had another woman elected to Congress. So for a brief shining moment, we had 5 women in Congress, and then this most recent election, it went back to 4 women in Congress. So women are under 25% of Pennsylvania's congressional delegation, but we ooched up on the women in elected office rankings and have a little bit more parity. We're nowhere near parity for women, but we're a little bit better. And that's the kind of thing, gerrymandering locks in all kinds of lack of representation, all kinds of disparities. If certain people are deciding who wins and who loses, they're drawing it for their buddies, and that's going to be reflected in the way the whole thing plays out. So maps matter, fair maps matter. But the remedy that we saw from that lawsuit was temporary. There's no guarantee in law for better maps in Pennsylvania's future. And it was also partial, because the PA House and Senate districts drawn in 2012 and 2013 were among the most gerrymandered in the nation. So we had one of the worst congressional maps. By various measures, we had the worst. There's kind of 5 very respected measures. 3 of those measures, Pennsylvania's map was the worst. By the other 2, we were among the 3 worst. So I would say we were the most gerrymandered congressional map. And for our state House and Senate maps, they were also among the worst. In 2018, the Washington Post ran a story about gerrymandered state House maps, and it showed that the vote share and the seats won for Pennsylvania was 50% worse than the next 2 states, Michigan and North Carolina. So very, very gerrymandered map. We started working on redistricting reform, Fair Districts PA, as a project of the League of Women Voters, and we're nonpartisan. We are all volunteers. We started in 2016, and in 2018, we had 2 bills that got a lot of attention, and we had a very large rally with over 800 people in the Capitol Rotunda, and they have since limited rallies to, they said 300 people. I think now they're down to 200 people, and when they hear that we're coming to the Capitol, I get a call immediately. We just want to remind you there is a limit to how many people you can have in the Rotunda. We had the last large rally and one of the largest in several decades in the Capitol Rotunda. The Senate bill we had 21 co-sponsors. It was passed in committee with some amendments. It went on the Senate floor, and then it got saddled with an amendment creating judicial districts in a way that would give the legislators power over our Supreme Courts, our higher courts. And there was great outcry. including from us. We immediately backed off from that bill, and it got buried under 600 plus amendments in the House. At the same time, we had a bill in the House that had 110 co-sponsors, so that's more than half of the legislators in the House, and that was amended in committee with less than 24 hours notice given about what the bill would be. We were called by legislators in that committee, told that they're going to do something to your bill, you should show up, and a lot of us did show up, and we watched as an amendment to our bill was handed out and voted on without time for the legislators to read the amendment, and it would have created a commission with 4 from the majority party, 2 from the minority party, and no public hearing, no public input, no criteria. It would have made gerrymandering even more toxic in Pennsylvania. After that, well, just one other thing to say. This isn't something that Fair Districts was working, just saying we want this. We actually helped fund a survey in 2019, which found that voters across the board believe that legislators should not be drawing their own district lines. So 72% say it lets party leaders put their interests ahead of voters' interests. They say it creates gridlock. There's lots of reasons that voters dislike allowing legislators to be the ones drawing the maps. And 67% of the people who answered the survey said there should be an independent commission to draw our district lines. But what we learned after all of this happened, we had public opinion on our side, we had a majority of legislators on our side, and yet we discovered that we have a legislative process that puts power in the hands of leaders in a way that deprives us of any kind of reform. So if you think about reforms that you might have wanted, and I don't know, some of you might be with the League of Women Voters, some of you might be with environmental groups, some of you might be concerned about fair school funding. I don't know what the issues are that you care about, but you're probably here because there are issues that you care about. When was the last time you saw the reform that you were advocating for? It doesn't happen in Pennsylvania. And what we've learned, and legislators patiently explained to us, they said, now you see? And I said, now I see something bad. I'm not sure what I'm seeing. And they said, what you're seeing is that the leaders draw the district lines. Those distorted districts protect the incumbents that the leaders choose, punish those legislators that the leaders don't like. In fact, legislators who supported our bills, some of them supported the bills because they had been told by leaders, I'll draw you off the map if you don't vote the way I tell you to. Explicitly told that. Vote this way or I will draw you off the map in the next redistricting. So leaders draw the districts. Those distorted districts protect incumbents or harm incumbents. The majority leaders control the legislative rules, the agenda, what bills move, what bills don't. And then that blocks any reform that people want. So since then, we continue to dig into this and learn more and more. We've learned that leaders control the caucus budget. So in other words, all the Republicans in the House have to answer to the leadership for their staff, for their travel, for anything that they do. I had one Republican legislator just tell me, you think it's only the staff in Harrisburg. It's also my staff here in my district office. And if they think the leader needs to know something that I'm thinking about doing and talking about, or who visits me, they'll tell them. So they, in some cases, act as spies for the leaders in those offices. They control the budget, they control the personnel, they control the legislative agenda, what bills move, what bills don't. They control budget negotiations. So if you're wondering who is negotiating Pennsylvania's budget as it is currently stuck, the Senate has only been in session 3 days since the budget deadline, June 30th. They are not negotiating the budget. It's the leadership who are doing the budget, and they'll tell their colleagues, this is what the budget's going to be, vote for it, and they'll do as they're told. That's how it works in Pennsylvania. And the leaders also control the flow of major campaign donations. So if you look at the money that is being given to the leadership, hundreds of millions of dollars come from just a few entities. And if you don't think those entities' agendas are the top priority for those leaders, you're kind of missing the story here. There's a man named Jeffrey Yass. I don't know if you've heard of him. He is a billionaire. He is one of the richest people in the country. He is an expert at avoiding taxes. He wants to privatize education. He wants to move as much as he can to privatization, and he's not at all interested in democracy, and he is the top donor for the Republican Senate leadership. If you check who is giving the money, he has all sorts of foundations that funnel money from one thing to another thing to another thing, and some of them he's the only donor for those entities, if you go and track back. So that's what's happening in our state legislature. So the will of one leader or one major donor can outweigh the interests of all of Pennsylvania and the voices of all other Pennsylvania legislators. So think about the people that you elect and what they tell you and what they say they're going to do and what actually happens when they get there. So we have a lot of really wonky volunteers, I'll just say that. We have people who love researching, they love digging around in data, they love figuring things out, and they love seeing what happens to bills. And so this last session, 2023-2024, there were 3,800 bills, more than 3,800 bills introduced. And if you look at that flow chart, you can see that most of them didn't go very far. And in the end, only 239 of those bills were enacted. So what they found is fewer than 1 in 5 bills are considered in committee. Half the bills that pass unanimously in one chamber are never given a final vote in the other. So these aren't partisan bills. These are bills passed unanimously in one chamber, and the other chamber leaders say, no, that's not happening. And it never happens. Less than 7% of introduced bills last session received a final vote. So then the question is, well, was that because it was a divided legislature? It had Democrats in the House and Republicans in the Senate. So they went back another session. 4,000 bills introduced the session before that. The same party, the GOP, controlled both of the chambers. Fewer than 1 in 5 bills were considered in committee. Half the bills that passed unanimously in one chamber were not given a final vote in the other chamber. And just about 7% of introduced bills received a final vote. And that a few more bills passed, 293 that session versus the 249 this past session. So how does that compare to other, when I started on this, is that good? Is that bad? It looks pretty bad to me, but what do I know? So we took a look at how we compare to some neighbor states. So Maryland has a 90-day session. Their legislators get paid half of what our legislators get paid per year. They passed 1,852 bills in 2024. That's in 1 year. Virginia has a 30 to 60-day session. They start in January, and they're usually done by the middle of March. They get paid $18,000 a year. They passed 1,659 bills last year. New York has a 2-year session. They get paid more than our folks do. They passed 1,316. West Virginia, 60-day session, 20,000 per year. They passed 680 bills in 2024. And Pennsylvania, full-time legislature, 106,000 per year. And in a 2-year session, that 239 bills passed, that's a 2-year session compared to 1 year of those other legislatures. So far this year, 48 bills have been enacted. This year might go down as the least productive in decades, given the way that they are stuck on the budget and they have done nothing but talk about the budget and not do anything about the budget for months and months and months. So we started a website called fixharrisburg.com. It's a joint partnership with the League of Women Voters. I would encourage you to take a look at it, fixharrisburg.com, where we talk about the legislative rules, how this plays out. We've written some, I think, really good reports. Our volunteers have written the reports. The first one, Dysfunction by Design, talks about the way the system is set up so that there are not votes on bipartisan solutions that would benefit Pennsylvania, mostly because either the very partisan edges of the party doesn't want those things to be given a vote, or because the major donors, the biggest wealthy billionaire donors, don't want those solutions to be enacted. But it's dysfunction by design. It doesn't have to be that way. Most states are much more effective, much more efficient, have rules in place that move bills along very quickly. We do not have those. And the most recent report, Is Gridlock Inevitable?, looks at kind of how this is playing out most recently with our divided legislature, and again, points to other states that managed to get a whole whole lot done, a whole lot faster than Pennsylvania. We also have volunteers who, if you look at that page, you'll see there's a section called The Problem, and on that page we have what we call stories of dysfunction, and we keep adding them. And those are things, if you look at some of the stories, you might say, those are not partisan issue. These are things that all of Pennsylvania wants to see fixed. Why are they not fixed? Why? For instance, cyber charter is one that I've been looking at a lot because that is a topic that's in the news right now. 3 auditor generals in a row over the last decade and a half, Republican and Democratic auditor generals have said Pennsylvania's cyber charter funding is unaccountable, is irrational, is harming school districts, and needs to be fixed. We have the worst cyber charter funding formula in the country. 3 auditor generals, long reports, lots of recommendations on how to fix it, nothing. And 96% of Pennsylvania school boards, 96%, that's a lot of school boards, have passed resolutions begging the state legislature to address cyber charter funding. This is not a partisan issue. And there are bills introduced to do this. Several of them have passed the PA House. The Senate refuses to even consider them in committee. So there's stories of dysfunction. Any one of those will make your blood boil. But the more we understand, the more we can push back, the more we can help other people understand, the more we can call attention to these things. So we're here to talk about redistricting, but what I want you to understand is this bubbles over into lots of other things. So early on, when I was just trying to get my head around this, I made this graphic, connect the dots, because I was being told by former legislators, I had lunch with some district attorneys who invited me to come and meet with them. What they wanted me to know is the dysfunction in our state, the corruption in our state, the gridlock in our state, all ties back to partisan redistricting. And I had one legislator, I had lunch with one former legislator. She had run for office. She had been in office 2 sessions, and then she had refused to run again because she said, I could get more done if I was a paperweight on the leader's desk. I'm not going to waste my life. But we were having lunch, and she goes, do you know what a keystone is? She does this with her hands. And I said, it is Pennsylvania. I know what a keystone is. She goes, gerrymandering is the keystone of corruption and control in Pennsylvania. I have seen that to be true. So this unfair procedural rules, we did not know that when I made my first graphic, but I added that along the way to say partisan gerrymandering also holds in place the ability of leaders to threaten their colleagues with being drawn off the map and gives them the power to keep these unfair procedural rules in place. But I've discovered there's another piece to this, and this summer this has become more and more apparent, and we're still trying to get our heads around how do we talk about that, because our goal is to talk about redistricting, and yet it kind of bubbles into all kinds of other things. And the other thing is money in Pennsylvania politics. And there are vast amounts of money. Pennsylvania has the worst no campaign limits. We have no gift ban. We have no firewalls against unaccountable money flowing through our state legislative process. Most states have boundaries on this. We have nothing. So that means that the very wealthiest folks have complete access and complete control, not control, but they have very much more influence than you or I have. I want to step back and look at maps again, though, because we did have some success. When I talk about this, I can see people just feeling like, should we just give up? Is it impossible? Is there any hope? And I want to say there is hope. So the congressional map that was drawn in 2022, there was a divided, the GOP had control of both chambers, invited folks to submit maps. I submitted a map. I think my map was really good. Chose one of those maps, didn't tell anybody why they chose the map they chose, and then changed the map without telling anybody why they changed it, and then submitted it. And if you looked at the kind of non-partial criteria, how to analyze a map, the 2012 district map so this is bell curve. I apologize, some of this gets wonky. But the bell curve of if you had a 50-50 election, these are ways maps could play out in terms of seats won. And the gray line right in the middle is if you have a fair map, that gray line is where it should land, right? If you have a fair map, that's where you should be. And if you end up way on the right side, it means you've got a map that is very much skewed toward giving you a Republican outcome. And if you went here on the blue side, that means you've got a map that's skewed toward giving you a map that's on the blue side. So our original congressional map in 2012 was one of the most biased in the country by various respected measures. And then the map that was proposed this more recent time in 2021 was not nearly as bad, but it was still bad, but it was not nearly as bad. But Governor Wolf had to sign off, and advocates like Fair Districts PA said this is a gerrymandered map. This is not a fair map. It won't deliver a fair outcome for the people of Pennsylvania. We ask you to veto it, and he did. He vetoed it. And then there was some litigation because we needed a new map because we'd gone from 18 to 17 seats. So it ended up with the court, and again, groups like ours requested the court to look for a map that was actually going to be fair. And the court did an interesting thing. They invited submission of maps. So I was part of a group with the League of Women Voters and Common Cause and Fair Districts that submitted a map. There's our map, the Alley Interveners. And all of these maps are maps that were submitted by different groups. You can see there were some Republican submitted maps that were actually a little bit more skewed than the map that the legislature suggested. There was a House Democrat map that was skewed towards Democrats a little bit. And the map that was finally chosen was the Carter map, which was the least change from the previous map, but also a very fair map. So one thing to celebrate is we have right now one of the best, most responsive congressional maps in the country. By the various measures, we're one of the two most responsive. And if you looked at how that played out in the last two elections, in 2022, there were 9 Ds, 8 Rs that were elected from that map. In the next election, there was a red wave. There were 10 Rs and 7 Ds elected from the same map, which means that that map actually responds to voters. Unusual phenomenon right now in the United States, but we have a good congressional map. Also, in the House and Senate maps, there was a public process. Mark Nordenberg was the chair of that commission, as I said. We advocated with him to have a public process, to have a public website, to invite testimony, to invite experts to review maps, and he went way beyond what we asked him to do. He had 16 public hearings, 36 expert witnesses, citizen witnesses. I was invited to come and give testimony 3 times, and there were other organizational leaders who came, lots and lots of testimony. And the outcome was, again, back to wonky bell curves. But if you look at the maps in the previous 2 decades, the map from 2002 yielded 9 extra Republican seats in a typical 50-50 election. So if people voted and it was a exact 50-50, Republicans would end up with 9 extra House seats. In the next decade, 2012 decade, if you had a 50-50 election, Republicans would have ended up with 15 extra seats. So I had a Republican legislator say, the court gerrymandered the map, the House map. I was like, well, the court actually didn't draw the House map. It was the commission that drew the House map. But if you have a map that gives one party 15 extra seats, how do you get to a map that doesn't give anybody extra seats? You're going to have to change it. And his thing was, well, you took 14 seats away from us. And it's like, well, you still have 1 extra seat in a typical 50-50 election. But the outcome on the last one, the 2022 one, is it's actually a very, very balanced map. In a 50-50 election, by various metrics, you'll end up with half of your seats red, half of your seats blue. And if you know what's happening right now in our House, right now we have 102 Democrats and 101 Republicans. They don't like it very much because what that means is it's balanced, and it means that every vote counts, and it means that they actually have to start listening to voters because we could change the majority of that chamber with our votes because that map is drawn in a way that our votes matter. The Senate map is not quite as good. If you look, starting back in 1992, in a typical 50-50 election, there would be 4 extra Republican seats. The next decade, 4.5 extra Republican seats. The next decade, 4.5 extra Republican seats. Now it's down to 1.5 extra Republican seats. So still slightly skewed in one direction, but close enough that if voters said, we want to be heard, it could shift. And I want to say again, we're nonpartisan, so this isn't, bashing one side or the other. It's simply saying a good map is one that if voters say these people are listening to us, that party will have the majority. And if they say this party is not listening to us, then that party will not have the majority. But if you have a map with a built-in outcome, no one's going to listen at all. And that's the challenge. So 2031 is coming. And new maps will be drawn in 2031. As I said before, the remedies that we've seen, the better maps that we've seen, there's no guarantee of those in the future. There's nothing in law that requires public input. There's nothing in law that requires the kind of good criteria we saw in the more recent maps. There's nothing in law that requires maps that respond to voters. So we have two bills that we are working on. House Bill 31, introduced by Representative Steve Samuelson, who is a Democrat from Northampton, and Representative Mark Gillen, who is a Republican from Berks County, and it's 31 because the next redistricting will be 2031. So it's to remind us there's a deadline coming toward us. And then the Senate bill is 131, introduced by Senator Tim Carney, who's a Democrat from Delaware County. And this bill, it's an improvement over the bills we had in the past because we've actually looked at 3 different safeguards. So one of those safeguards is a truly independent commission. This is for Congressional and State House and Senate, but a commission that's truly independent. So the legislators are not choosing the commission. The legislators are not approving the map. The legislators they do not have their fingers in this at all. People apply, and then the applications are whittled down by the Department of State, the State Ethics Commission, and then the first 6 are chosen randomly from pools of candidates, and then those 6 round out the demographic with the final 5 selection. And we can go into detail, but that would take us all night. So we have a summary out in the hall if you want to see it, or you can read the bill online. But commission independence is one safeguard. Another one is a really transparent public process where people actually have a say, where they can give testimony, where you have an online website where people can submit maps, as we did last time, submitting maps after we've had lots of public discussion. And the third one is prioritized mapping criteria. What kind of criteria would protect communities? What kind of criteria would keep counties from being splintered into more pieces than they need to be? And so there's very carefully thought through prioritized mapping criteria. As I said, we have a summary out in the hall. You can pick it up and see how those are described, but then much more detail on the various pieces of the bill. And a couple of things I'm just proud about, I just want to share. One is that we began that review of the bill with a mapping competition. So we had mappers across the state draw maps, and then we had given them the criteria from the previous bill, and they drew maps using the criteria from the previous bill, and then we discussed it. How did that criteria work? Is it doable? What was the outcome of the maps? And we had really good discussion and incorporated some feedback from that. We also looked at previous bills, redistricting reform bills, going back to the 1980s, and there have been bills almost every session in Pennsylvania on this, from both parties, from both chambers, going back to the 1980s. We went through those, looking for good provisions that could be incorporated into this bill. The bill addresses prison gerrymandering, which is making sure that people are counted in their home communities rather than the places they're incarcerated, because if you count them where they're incarcerated, there's just a handful of places that have large prisons, and those legislators don't have to deal with those folks. And then the counties the districts that those people are from are losing representation, while those places that have prisons are gaining representation. So that's incorporated into the bill. And then the bills were reviewed by groups like Common Cause, League of Women Voters, Latino Justice, the Prison Policy Initiative, with a really detailed markup from redistricting litigators at the Campaign Legal Center. So these bills had a lot of input, a lot of oversight, and really proud of them. One question that comes up sometimes recently came up, compactness. Why couldn't we just have an algorithm that these districts have to be compact? And one of the things the mappers realized, when you look at Pennsylvania's geography. When was the last time you looked at Pennsylvania's geography? I've been doing a road trip from Chester County across the north part of the state. I went through State College, Clinton, Clarion, and if you try to draw a compact map, what you have is you have districts with pieces that don't connect, and you have to go through multiple districts to get to the other side of the ridge. Not all of our ridges have ways through, and we also have rivers, and there have been many districts that we've looked at where you have to go through 2 other districts to get to the other side of the river. So compactness isn't a great criteria in Pennsylvania. And also, I don't know if you've looked at our boundaries of some of our cities. That's Lancaster City. Not very compact. That's Pittsburgh. Also not very compact. So compactness is in the bill, but it's the last criteria, and it says, to the extent possible, without violating preceding criteria, districts should be compact, and district boundaries shall conform to natural boundaries. So those kind of our intention, but the idea is, as you're drawing districts, take a look at the map, not just the map on paper, but the real map, and make sure that this makes sense. And to allow communities to say, this does not make sense for our community. Allow that kind of community input. One other question that comes up is about algorithms. We are all hearing a lot about algorithms. Can you draw a map using algorithms? And there are people who say, that's the thing. Just have an algorithm, it draws a map, nobody's involved, perfect. I saw an article just recently, the rise of the halmander. Is gerrymandering by algorithm the next frontier of partisan gerrymandering? And the problem is, any algorithm, some human has to program that in there. And who knows what they did? And how can you review that? And how can you see it? So bias can be packed into it, baked into it, without anybody really knowing or understanding it. One of the things that article said is we cannot automate partisan gerrymandering out of existence, but we might perpetuate it through automation. And Common Cause has a good article about this. I won't go into detail, but it's just that some human has to do it. And also, if you have algorithms and you program a computer to draw maps, it's not going to draw one map. It's going to draw thousands and thousands and thousands of maps. And then who decides which of those maps is the one that we're going to use? So constitutional amendments in Pennsylvania take a long time. It is not an easy process. I'm really jealous of Michigan. Remember, I mentioned that Michigan had a very badly gerrymandered map when we had one. Theirs wasn't as bad as ours. But while we were starting Fair Districts PA, Michigan started collecting signatures to have a referendum. And by the next election, they had a vote for an independent commission. They didn't have to go through their legislature. They didn't have to convince any legislators to give up power. They just collected a whole lot of petition signatures, and they got it on the ballot. And now they have an independent commission, which drew their maps this last time, and they have much, much better maps. That doesn't happen in Pennsylvania. We're one of 24 states that does not have citizen initiative. And we also are one of 10 states that require constitutional amendments to go through the state legislature twice, not just once, twice. And we are one of just 4 that have 2-year legislative sessions. So we're one of 4 states with the longest avenue towards a constitutional amendment. And in our situation, amendments have to pass 3 months before the next general election. So we are in this 2025-2026 session. The bills have been introduced. What we need to have is for them to pass the House and Senate before the end of next June. Before July 4th next year, really. Pass the House and Senate again in the next session, and then a referendum, 2008, 2009, once it passed, can get scheduled, so that they're ready in place to choose a commission during the year of the census, and that the commission then draws the new maps in 2031. It's a heavy lift. How do we convince them to do that? There's the question. So back to talking about the redistricting wars for a moment. I'm jumping around, but it's all threads that kind of connect together. So Texas says, we're going to redraw the map. We're going to find 5 more Republican seats. California says, oh yeah, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna find more blue seats. Problem for California is they have an independent citizens redistricting commission. So they have to have a vote from the public that they can redistrict apart from their commission. And there's gonna be all sorts of legal challenges of this, I'm sure. It's not clear. Can they even do that? But they're planning to do that. They have a map ready to go, and they're gonna get a vote on it in this, I think they're planning to call a special election election, which will cost millions of dollars to vote on this proposed map. And then other states are kind of jumping in as dominoes. We'll do it. And New York, which is another populous state, they want to do it, but they have a constitutional amendment that says they've got to amend their constitution to be allowed to do that. So they can't get there till 2028. We are the most populous swing state, but divided government means for now, right now, we are protected from this battle because we've got divided government. There's neither side could gerrymander the other side. They'd have to pass a bill that they agree on. I promise you that is not going, they can't pass a budget, let alone pass a redistricting bill that gerrymanders one side or the other. That's not going to happen. So for right now, we're protected from this battle. Is this good for democracy, this redistricting battle? And I would say it is not good for democracy. And we hear a lot about people saying, well, you have to fight fire with fire. If one side does it, the other side needs to do it. Frustrated voters in Texas and other states are saying, this is not how it's supposed to work. And the truth is, when you gerrymander, the people become pawns in a partisan game played by the leaders. The people are losing their voice. And if they've already lost their voice, they're losing their voice further. And so there was an article just yesterday in USA Today, and I have to apologize because the last bit of this I just pulled together because this is all unfolding as we go, and I've been on the road talking at the same time trying to keep an eye on what's happening. So states are doing this, but there are many people from both parties in all of these states saying, why? Why are we doing this? This is not the way it's supposed to work. And some states are saying we're not going to do it. So interestingly, Indiana, which is a blue state, is just saying, no, we're not doing it. Moderates to Trump-supporting conservatives across the board, Indiana is saying, no, we don't want to participate in this. It's a moral failure. It costs a lot of money to redistrict. It's super confusing to voters when you suddenly have new districts. Sometimes that has to happen, but for the most part, voters are not really crazy about having their districts redrawn in the middle of things. It's very disruptive of the way the system works to have mid-decade redistricting done. And the outcome is to disenfranchise even more voters than are already disenfranchised. And even in Texas, people are saying, everybody is just disgusted. This is not the way it's supposed to work. And it's causing people just to not come and show up. They just feel like my vote doesn't matter. Why should I bother? I've been tracking this this person who I discovered on Twitter, and I just thought everything she says I agree with, which is very rare. It's very rare that I see somebody I say everything she says I agree with. She was a former senator in Ohio, and she's saying this whole thing is wrong, and America's political leadership is failing the people. And superficially, I see you a political gerrymander, and I'll raise you one. Fight fire with fire. On one level, that makes sense, and I've been having lots of discussions with people who are saying, well, we have to do this. This is the way we save democracy. And she says, well, you can't. The answer to the erosion of democracy cannot be less democracy. It has to be more democracy. And I agree with her completely. And she says, right now, our processes are being driven by corporations and a handful of billionaires who want to control government. And they don't care if the politician they're buying is a Democrat or Republican. And we, the people, need our elected officials to betray their corporate donors and honor us, the people they serve. And I think that is totally right. Right now, they are betraying us and honoring the wishes of their owner donors. And so we are struggling, Fair Districts PA, with the question of money is a big piece of this story. That's not what we were formed to work on. And yet, to connect the dots, we have to say money is part of this. And we, the Republicans and Democrats, are feeling unheard because of gerrymandered districts. I mentioned I'm doing this road trip. I went to the Grange Fair in Center Hall in Center County, which is have any of you ever been to the Grange Fair? It's it's like the largest Grange Fair in the country, the oldest Grange Fair in the country, and I was part of a parade with the League of Women Voters handing out our rat cards, which some of them are out in the hall and you can pick up on your way out. But I had really good conversations with people who are like, nobody listens to us. We can't figure it out. Nobody listens to us. Our legislators vote for things that will never benefit us, like vouchers for schools, for school choice when we have no private schools anywhere. There's none. Our county has nothing like that. Why are they voting for things that don't benefit us? And so people in rural Pennsylvania and urban Pennsylvania and suburban Pennsylvania all feel like this system isn't working for us. So how do we say, you're right, it's not working for you, because our legislators aren't answering to us. They're answering to the people who draw the district lines and the people who take the millions of dollars from their very wealthy donors. So how do we push back on that? There's the question. I do want to say, looking at Texas closely, and I did this afternoon, Michael Bussell, who is my host this part of the trip, and is our Erie and Northwest PA coordinator, he pointed out that there are more registered Democrats in Texas than there are registered Republicans. How can that be? And I think I think these numbers, I got something wrong with these numbers here. I think I think I have a 1 where there shouldn't be a 1. It should be 7 million. So it should, I just did this afternoon. I'm looking at, I think that 1 is in the wrong place. It should be 7 million Democrats, 6 million something Republicans, and then the unaffiliated voters. But when you look at who voted, more Republicans than Democrats voted. So what happens when you gerrymander districts, basically you're telling people, you don't matter, don't come. And then people believe that, and they don't matter, and they don't come. But almost 100% of Republicans voted in the last election, less than 25% of Democrats. So what would happen if people understood what was going on, looked at maps, said, oh no, you don't get away with this, and actually voted? You could turn a dummy mander into a major dummy mander. You could turn it into a mudslide. And so that's what I would say is part of the goal is to help people understand what's going on, help them to look at maps, help them to think about their voices, help them to think about why it's important to vote, why it's important to encourage other people to vote. And I'll just say briefly, I mentioned the Congressional District 7. When we first started looking at these maps, that whole region was, except for that part that was packed into the blue of Philadelphia, there was a lot of red. But when people started looking at maps, they said, wait a second, this is being done so that we don't have a voice? Who is doing this? And when people start thinking about that, they said, I don't like that. I don't like that the maps are being drawn to deprive me of a vote. And that whole region has now gone almost completely blue. And what's interesting is the legislators who've been elected are folks who, for the most part, understand that they answer to voters, not their leaders. And so I would say that the answer to stomping on democracy is more democracy. And to go back to that Jefferson Society quote, helping people understand what's at stake, helping people understand why maps matter, helping people see the data of how many voters are here, how are these voters voting, what would happen if we enlisted a whole bunch of new registered voters and help them to understand what matters. I mean, so there are ways to push back that actually strengthen democracy rather than trample democracy. And that's the goal. You can't protect democracy by destroying democracy. The solution, more democracy. So the next 12 months are crucial. We need a bill to pass by June 2026 or 4th of July at the latest. And here's what we say to legislators. No one knows who will control the PA House or Senate in 2031. No one knows who will be sitting in the governor's office, and no one knows who will hold the PA Supreme Court majority. So no one knows who will have the final say in determining Pennsylvania's voting districts. What we do know is when one party uses redistricting to hold control, the partisan divide grows deeper and voters' distrust increases. And we also know if one party controls it, the other party is going to be drawn off the map into oblivion for the next decade and possibly beyond. So the legislators have just a short time frame to fix this because they're the ones at risk. And if they don't fix it, by the time they realize who is going to have the majority, who is going to be sitting in the governor's seat, it's too late. There's nothing they can do. If they get to 2030 and they haven't fixed this, it's too late. And the other thing I think it's really important to say is there's millions of dollars being spent right now on redistricting in these states. that there's going to be millions of dollars pouring into our state house and Senate races between now and 2030 to try to control the redistricting process. And the only way to prevent that, number one, is some campaign finance reform, would be great. And number two is to fix the redistricting process. Otherwise, our legislators themselves are putting themselves and their colleagues right in harm's way with opposition research, with misinformation advertising, with toxic messaging against them. They can spare themselves that by putting some reforms in place quickly. Will they do that? I don't know, but it's up to us to help them understand that they need to be doing that. When I first talked about these redistricting bills with legislators, I was in Senator Lisa Boscolo's office with the first bill that she was going to introduce. I was just beginning to learn about this. And she looked at me and the president of the League of Women Voters at the time and fixed her eyes on us and said, unless advocates are allowed, this will never happen. And I looked around, I thought, there's some senators here, there's some representatives, there's policy staff. Why is she looking at us? I have no idea why she's looking at us. And what I've learned is our system is broken, and our legislators often feel like there's nothing they can do. It's up to us to help them have the courage to do something. It's up to us to help them understand that we expect them to represent us. It's up to us to make sure that somebody runs against them if they choose not to listen. That's how democracy works, and that's what we're called to do. And it's hard work, but if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So there's out in the hall, there's a document called Ways to Support the Work for PA Redistricting Reform. One of them is to contact your legislators to ask them to support an independent redistricting commission. Right now, none of your Erie legislators have expressed support. None of them have met with constituents to talk about this. And so part of the goal is to say, we want you to fix this, and we want you to do it now. That's one way you can help. Another one is to hold a postcard party and send postcards to your legislators. We have postcards out in the hallway, and you can order them on our website as well. Another one is to serve as a liaison. If any of you are in organizations that might want to have a speaker, we have speakers who can come and speak. Help your organization understand the reason we're not fixing these things is because we have a legislature that doesn't listen, and help people understand how to connect the dots on these issues. And then also follow us on social media. That helps us spread the word. We have a Fair Districts PA website, fairdistrictspa.com. I also mentioned our Fix Harrisburg website. Both of those have a lot of information. The Fair Districts one has a Join Us. You can volunteer on that. It tells you ways to take action, donate page. And one of the things we say is gerrymandering is not anyone's top issue. For me, it was school funding. I was a youth pastor. I worked with kids in an affluent neighborhood, and I worked with kids in a very poor neighborhood, and I kept thinking, who thinks it's okay that the kids who have everything get more, and the kids who have nothing get less? Who thinks that's okay? That was the question that got me started. And the more I learned, the more angry I got, and the more angry I got, the more active I got. And so here I am, road tripping around Pennsylvania saying, we have to fix this for ourselves, but for our kids, our grandkids, and for all those kids who don't have an adult insisting that they get the education that they deserve. So what's the issue that is motivating you? How does that connect in? How do you use that motivating issue to say, we've got to fix this too? It's not our first issue, but we have to fix it to be able to fix the other issues. And the one other thing I want to say is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is next July 4th, which is in a sense the deadline for this bill that we have. We want the bill passed by July 4th. And if you think about what happened 250 years ago, our forefathers said, representation matters, democracy matters, having a voice here matters, having a system that works for us and not the rich folks back in England matters. And they were willing to make those sacrifices to get here. Sometimes people say, Carol, you know what, you're kind of, how can I say this nicely? You're kind of wasting your life here because this is never going to happen. And I say, well, think about women's vote. How long did it take for women to get the vote? When did they start talking about that? How many people told them to shut up and go home? And yet they didn't. They kept working towards it. And look, we have the vote. Amazing. I had friends who worked and lived in South Africa when there was apartheid. I don't know if you know much about South Africa, but apartheid, very divided. Some people had the vote, some people didn't. We had friends who ran youth camps for kids from different racial groups when that was illegal to do. And their friends would say, why in the world are you doing this? It's illegal, it's dangerous, and it's stupid. You're teaching kids about voting, and those kids are never going to be allowed to vote. You're teaching kids about being leaders, and those kids are never going to be allowed to be leaders. And they said apartheid will fall. And when it does, we want people to be ready and to know how to use that opportunity well. The next time I saw those friends, apartheid had fallen. How did that happen? I don't know, but those kids are now leaders, and those kids knew how to vote. Those kids have helped shepherd South Africa through some very rocky times. And so I would say that democracy is not self-propagating. Democracy is not self-protecting. Democracy does not stand on its own. It's done by citizens like us who say this matters, and this is worth sacrifice, this is worth time, this is worth effort. And one last thing I want to say, this is my last comment. We had 12 interns this summer, college students who were wonderful. We hired them to go to parks and festivals and fairs and collect petition signatures, and they were fantastic. And they believed that this really matters. They wanted to do this. They spent a lot of time. They put on a lot of miles. I've been looking at their mileage reimbursements saying, oh my goodness, these kids were on the road all summer. One of those interns, in his application, it said, why do you want to do this? And what he said was this: the future of democracy runs through Pennsylvania. And I think that's the case. The future of democracy runs through Pennsylvania. If we can get an independent redistricting commission, there are lots of states watching us, wishing for that, wondering if it's possible, wondering what it would take. I hear from people in other states saying, we don't have initiative either. What are we going to do? And so what we can do is say it can be done. And it will be done by democracy. It will be done by people informing other people, educating other people, advocating with their legislators, insisting their legislators represent them, and by encouraging people to run against the legislators who refuse to listen. That's how we'll get there. The future of democracy runs through Pennsylvania. So thank you. Thank you. And yes, we will have questions. Go ahead.
That screenshot showing Texas, the screenshot showing Texas proportion. Mm-hmm. I have an indivisible group that I lead, and that actually, I felt that response to that, like, oh my God, that can't be true. If that were available for me to make a postcard of and take it to all my members and not do what you did, but that's so clear if you look at it, I think that would impact them as far as I'm running the voting initiative for my group, to say, see what you can do with a vote. I would love to get that screenshot. Is that possible?
Sure. I remember I have to correct it because there is an error. I did that like half an hour before I came tonight, so I have to go back and check it and make sure I have my numbers right. But
I would be so grateful.
But if you give me your email, I will make sure that I get it corrected and share the corrected one with you, because I would hate to be sharing. I'm a little embarrassed that I had an error in there tonight, and I apologize. But I was moving fast, and I will correct that. But it is true that there are more registered Democrats than Republicans in Texas, and it is true that the Democrats turned out in very low numbers last time, and if they turned out in real numbers, they could flip many of those districts and change the outcome of what's going on in Texas, for sure.
Please don't share it as a screenshot because it's not accessible to people who rely on screen. It should be shared as text only, or screenshot.
Okay. And we do have the emails of everybody's here, so possibly we can share. I have to think of how we would share that, but we can share stuff. I've been sharing slides with the places I've been to because people are like, I need to be able to do something with these pieces, and I'm happy to share that, but I do want to correct it first. Any other questions? Yeah, from the back. Oh, here.
I don't know how many people saw Michael's op-ed in the newspaper yesterday. I was glad that that was in there. At the same time, people are trying to make sure that people are informed. We're living in an era where news coverage has just been, I like that dummy gerrymandered thing, has been dumbed down. But I'm thinking that I'm on the advisory board now to Pennsylvania News Leaders Association. And the editors know that one of the things they have to protect is right to know and the Sunshine Act. And there have been campaigns in the past where there have been statewide editorial campaigns. And this strikes me as something that might be pitched somewhere to like the news editors. And there might be, you mentioned other organizations where there's, these are issues that Pennsylvanians agree on that aren't being enacted because of this. So are there other organizations that you can think of where you could route this through them? Because this is, I thank everybody I know who's been involved in fair districts, but I had struggled to understand it until tonight. This was just an amazing presentation. Thank you. So
Well, thank you.
That would be my suggestion, is see if there's the appetite. Our newspaper does not have editorials. It just has op-eds. But the Philadelphia Inquirer still has columnists. I mean, the Penn Live, what a disappointment that is after winning a Pulitzer all those years ago, and it's all clickbait. So anyhow, I don't know which ones are still strong, but collectively, I would think news editors might be interested in this.
Thank you.
Because it's the same, the same thing, representation, people's voices, et cetera.
And I will say the whole issue of news is a really important one here. And so part of, asking you to share stuff on social media is when you look at who do people trust, who do people get information from, often it's people that they know. And I find many of the people I know don't know who to believe. They don't know what to trust. They don't know who to believe. And so even just to gently tell people this source is probably not super accurate, this source is probably better, to be an advocate for news, for fair, for genuine information, and to share information that you have. I think people want to know who to trust. It's hard to know. So thank you for that suggestion. And if you have any ideas about ways to get there, I would love to hear more from you. There was another question somewhere, I think. Yeah.
Is there a Facebook page?
So we have a state Facebook page. We also have local Facebook pages, which we would love to have you like and share your local Facebook pages, because we find that legislators like to think, well, they're all people from Philly, or all they're all whoever. And we have supporters in every single district across the state. We have supporters across the political spectrum. And how do we get them to know that? Partly is by having local Facebook pages where we can tag legislators. So for instance, right now I think we're live streaming this on the Fair Districts PA state page, but feel free to share that and mention that you were here, and feel free to tag your local legislators and invite them to take a look. So we have the Fair Districts PA Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have a Fix Harrisburg Twitter account, and we have local Facebook pages. We also have a YouTube channel which has a lot of presentations and parts of conferences that we've had, and lots of information there. There's lots of information. If you like information, check our website and our YouTube channel. There's plenty.
How about Instagram?
We do have Instagram. We do have Instagram, although we don't find Instagram as the best. It's not information rich, which what we're doing is information rich. But we do have an Instagram. We have an Instagram account also.
Sound bites reach young people.
Yep.
Sound bites reach more people.
And we have a
in my
TikTok. We have
opinion.
TikTok too. We have we don't post as much as we probably should, but we have a Fair Districts PA TikTok and a Fix Harrisburg TikTok.
I've heard so many young people indicate that they don't vote because of all the bickering,
Yeah,
and I don't know how to fix that.
yeah. And I think that is an issue for, I think all of us need to be democracy ambassadors. So I have friends who never thought about registering to vote, and I ask them, hey, are you registered? There's a deadline, and this is really important. So I have friends who, they call me and they say, Carol, I'm registered. I'm going to vote. Remind me how to know who to vote for. And then I talk them through, what I talk them through what I look for when I think about candidates and what I'm looking for. And they call me back and they tell me, Carol, I did. Remember, I was a youth pastor for 11 years, so I know a lot of young adults, and I nag them, which they don't mind. So it's okay. So be a nag. Do it. Any other questions?
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. This was really, really educational. I have a question about, so, you said that the Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, ruled that the former badly gerrymandered maps were unconstitutional, but that doesn't provide any remedy for the future for us. Like even that, I guess precedent that would be set by that ruling doesn't provide any future remedy. If this redistricting effort fails legislatively, can we have any comfort that the past Supreme Court ruling could provide any relief if there's another badly gerrymandered map? Like, is that sort of a fallback? Is there a plan B? Is there a fallback position? And how important is the upcoming Supreme Court Justice, I'm forgetting the
retention election.
The retention election.
The retention election is really important.
In this,
it is very important.
In this, I guess, if we're going to call that a plan B. And thank you again.
I would say the retention election is important because I've been impressed with how the current court has, I think, from my perspective, from a League of Women Voters and a Fair Districts perspective, they have ruled on behalf of voters. And sometimes they've ruled in ways that Democrats don't particularly like or ways Republicans don't particularly like, but they have ruled on behalf of voters. Voters' votes should matter. Districts should be fair. Our voices should be heard. I've been impressed with their rulings. If 3 of them are not retained, then it's down to 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and then it's a bit of a mess. The governor can appoint, but then it's a messy process going forward. So that's why we don't know for sure who will be. I know one of the justices will age out. There's an age limit for our Supreme Court justices here in Pennsylvania. One will age out before 2031, so there will be an election for that position. So we don't know for sure what the court will be, and I hate to be in the place where we say, well, precedent does not necessarily decide things going forward, but what we're seeing with the courts is precedent does not necessarily decide what's happening. So is there a plan B? I think plan B is us. Plan B is people. Plan B is citizens. And I think that's always the case. Plan A is citizens being outspoken, being informed, standing up for what's right, standing up for the law. And I know that there are people who say Carol believes in unicorns and rainbows. It's not really true, but I do believe in democracy, and I believe I have met so many fantastic people doing this work, people who are determined to see the state go in the right direction. And I know there are legislators struggling because they want to do what's right, and they're trying to figure out how to do that in a way that that they are still there, able to work on this, but able to have some impact and carefully navigating that space. If there were more of us